Hello and welcome to the Cloud Computing School YouTube channel. In this how-to video, we will show you how to configure an Azure Virtual Network (VNet) and Azure portal. This demo assumes that you are logging into the Azure portal with user credentials which have the minimum required permissions to create and configure an Azure VNet resource. This can be accomplished by using either a built-in or custom Azure RBAC role. Azure Virtual Network is a service that provides the fundamental building block for your private network in Azure. An instance of the service, a virtual network, enables many types of Azure resources to securely communicate with each other, the Internet, and on-premises networks. These Azure resources include virtual machines (VMs). A virtual network is similar to a traditional network that you'd operate in your own data center. But it brings extra benefits of the Azure infrastructure, such as scale, availability, and isolation. Azure Virtual Networks are Layer 3 overlays. Azure does not support any Layer 2 semantics, such as VLANs. You can, however, extend your on-premises subnets to Azure using a Layer 3 overlay network-based solution. You can also perform subnet delegation. Subnet delegation enables you to designate a specific subnet for an Azure PaaS service of your choice that needs to be injected into your virtual network. To create a new Azure VNet and Azure portal, carry out the following steps. First off, plan for your Azure VNET subnetting. You should take the following principles into account: Azure Firewall, Azure Bastion, Azure Application Gateway, Azure Root Server, ExpressRoute Gateway, VPN Gateway, Redis Cache, Azure SQL Managed Instance, Azure Database for MySQL, Azure Database for PostgreSQL, and Azure Apps Service Environment are some of the most common services which require their own dedicated Azure VNet subnet. Each VNet must have a default subnet. You can perform the IPv4 subnetting operation by using any available IPv4 subnetting calculator. In our example, we will start off with a /16 network and subnet it to multiple smaller subnets. After you have created the list of subnets to create in your Azure VNet, head over to the Azure portal and click on Create a Resource. Search for VNet and click Create under the Virtual Network resource. On the Basics tab, provide the designated Azure subscription, resource group, VNet name and region, and click Next. On the Security tab, uncheck the Virtual Network Encryption checkbox. This feature is still limited to a small number of Azure regions and is yet expected in most regions. Check the Enable Azure Bastion checkbox and provide the Azure Bastion host name and its public IP address. Create a new public IP address if none exists. Check the Enable Azure Firewall checkbox and provide the Azure Firewall name, tier, create a firewall policy or choose to use classic firewall rules and choose the firewall public IP address. Create a new public IP address if none exists. The Azure Firewall subnet name is reserved and pre-created as Azure Firewall Subnet. Check the Enable Azure DDoS Network Protection and create a new DDoS protection plan, then click Next. On the IP Addresses tab, you get to define your VNet subnets, including the default subnet. Define the address space of your virtual network with one or more IPv4 or IPv6 address ranges. Create subnets to segment the virtual network address space into smaller ranges for use by your applications. When you deploy resources into a subnet, Azure assigns the resource and IP address from the subnet. Some subnets have already been created for special usage, i.e., the Azure Firewall, Azure Firewall Management, Azure Bastion, and default subnets. Add any of your designed subnets, as per the output of the subnet calculator which you used earlier on. Choose to make your extra subnet a private subnet. Private subnets enhance security by not providing default outbound access. To enable outbound connectivity for virtual machines to access the Internet, it is necessary to explicitly grant outbound access. A NAT gateway is the recommended way to provide outbound connectivity for virtual machines in a private subnet. Choose to create a new NAT gateway and a new network security group, NSG. Click Add. Then click Next to continue. Optionally provide tag key value pairs and click Next. After you have reviewed all deployment parameters for your Azure VNet, click Create. Wait until the Azure VNet and all dependent resources have been provisioned. For the Azure Firewall and Bastion, deployment times can be quite long. You can, in the meantime, browse to the Azure VNet resource to check the overview blade as well as the IP address space and subnets blades. Also notice that a default Network Watcher RG resource group has been deployed with a single Network Watcher resource, which corresponds to the newly created Azure VNet. Designating a custom name to this resource group can only be done via Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to the Cloud Computing YouTube channel to be notified of upcoming how-to videos.